My friend Jones is not a very practical person. Driving along a main road one dark night, he suddenly had a flat tire. Even worse, he discovered that he did not have a spare wheel in the back of his car. Joan waved to passing cars and lorries, but not one of them stopped. Half an hour passed, and he was almost in despair. At last, he waved to a car just like his own. To his surprise, the car actually stopped. Disappointed, how could a person like this possibly help him? The lady, however, never changed a wheel in his life. She set work at once and fed the wheel in a few minutes while Jones looked on in admiration. Last year, we visited a large modern factory where they make window glass. We first saw workmen mixing sand and other materials together in the right amounts. Then, they added some broken glass to the mixture, as this helps it to melt. They then fed the mixture into a big hot oven. At the far end of the oven, a stream of liquid glass came out. Here, some men lowered a metals frame into the liquid. As the frame came up, it pulled away a hot sheet of glass. Special rollers took hold of the sheet at either side and carried it upwards. Our guide told us that at this stage, it was necessary for the glass to cool slowly, as this would make it very strong. At a height of 30 feet, the sheet of glass became cool, and another machine cut it into big pieces, which workmen stored away together. The glass was now ready for use. It was the ambition of an 11-year-old boy in Kansas City to be an engine driver. Born without arms, he had been to special schools where he learned to use his feet as hands. He spent all his spare time watching trains, and one day his dreams came true. Seeing a deserted engine, the boy climbed in. He had no difficulty in starting it up with his feet. Soon he was traveling along at 40 miles an hour. Signalmen could not see the young driver, so they set out to stop the train. Meanwhile, the boy reached Missouri, stopped the engine himself, and then made it go backwards. When he was near home, a railway man caught up with the engine and stopped it. At first, he was very angry, but he smiles when the boy said simply, "I like trains." "Well, I'm glad you don't like planes," answered the railway man. I always have a difficult time choosing original birthday presents. My imagination never seems to get beyond ties, handkerchiefs, or pairs of socks. But strangely enough, it did not take me long to decide on Tom's birthday present. For the first time in my life, I had a good idea. I would buy him a bottle of champagne. Before the party began, Tom suggested that I should open the bottle. I put it between my knees and began to pull, but it remained firmly corked. Soon a crowd gathered round to watch the fight between the bottle and me. I could hear all sorts of helpful suggestions from the guests, like break the top off, use your teeth, etc. But I was losing the battle. We were struggling on the floor together when all of a sudden there was a loud pop, and the cork shot up into the air while the angry bottle showered everybody with champagne. When the woman opened the door, she guessed at once that the man was a prisoner of war. There was mud on his face and on his torn clothes. He told the woman that a friend had given him her address. She immediately asked what the name of the friend was, but he replied that he had forgotten. This made the woman suspicious. She knew that the enemy was making every effort to prevent the local people from helping prisoners. Deciding not to take the risk, she told the man she could not help him. For days, she wondered whether she had acted rightly, until she heard that enemy soldiers had arrested a neighbor for helping a prisoner of war. The arrest put the villagers on their guard, for they realized that the enemy had sent out specially trained soldiers who presented to be prisoners who had escaped.
I always settle down comfortably in the barber's shop and listen patiently to my barber. He explains the present political situation, women's fashions, or tells me jokes, which I have heard at least 5 times already. In 20 minutes I get a remarkable amount of information, as well as a haircut. But last week our conversation was very short indeed. We heard loud cries of fire coming from upstairs. Customers and barbers rushed out of the shop immediately. We were certainly a funny sight to passers-by. I had a white sheet round my neck and my hair was half cut. My barber was close behind me with a comb and a pair of scissors in his hands. The man who had sat next to me was not so lucky. There was soap on one side of his face, and his barber ran after him holding a shaving brush in one hand and a razor in the other.
When the balloon rose to 3,000 feet, the pilot took off his ear pads. He had been wearing them ever since the balloon had left the ground so as not to hear the noise of the hot air fans. All at once, he heard a small, frightened voice below him calling, "Sir, would you please help me?" Looking down, the pilot saw a boy about 12 years old holding on to a rope. He immediately shouted back, "Hold on! Don't look at the ground! Look at me!" The balloon descended slowly, and the boy was soon safe on the ground again. As the pilot learned later, the boy had been eager to help before the balloon took off. Together with others, he had held on to the heavy ropes. The pilot had signaled, "Let's go!" Everybody did so, except the boy who had tied the rope to his wrist, and he was soon sailing through the air. As soon as Mr. and Mrs. Groves moved into their charming old house in the country, they decided to scrape away all faded green wallpaper from the walls. They began with the living room. Mr. Groves got a ladder from the garden, while his wife brought in a bucket of water. Then they wetted the paper well until it became soft. In this way, they were able to scrape it off easily. After 3 hours' hard work, when they were both beginning to feel rather tired, Mr. Groves pulled away a long strip of paper over the fireplace. He called out excitedly to his wife. The former owner had written these words on the wall: "We hope you enjoy making this room look beautiful as much as we did. Don't work too hard. Make yourselves a cup of tea." "What a good idea," said Mrs. Groves, and she hurried into the kitchen. Science had told us so much about the moon that it is fairly easy to imagine what it would be like to go there. It is certainly not a friendly place. As there is no air or water, there can be no life of any kind. There is no variety of scenery either. For mile after mile, there are only flat plains of dust with mountains around them. Above, the sun and stars shine in a black sky. If you step out of the mountain shadows, it will mean moving from severe cold into great heat. These extreme temperatures continually break rocks away from the surface of the mountains. The moon is also a very silent world, for sound waves can only travel through air. But beyond the broken horizon, you see a friendly sight. Our Earth is shining more brightly than the stars. From this distance, it looks like an immense ball, colored blue and green and brown. In the darkness, I leant over the railings and watched the ship cutting a path through the waves. It was pleasant to be on board on such a fine night, but the captain had told me that the ship would arrive at 5 o'clock in the morning. I therefore decided to return to my cabin because I wanted to get up early to take some photographs as the boat entered the harbor. It was very hot below, and in spite of my good intentions, I lay awake for hours listening to the ship's engines. At last, I went to sleep, but the noise made by heavy chains and the sound of the ship's whistle soon woke me up. I dressed hurriedly, seized my camera, and rushed outside. Then, I had an unpleasant surprise. The fine view I expected to see had disappeared. The ship had entered the harbor long before.